We're back. This is segment 4 of Civil Discourse Now. This is February 4th, 2012. We're coming to you from Indianapolis, Indiana. Big Hat Books at 6510 Cornell. My name is Mark Small. I'm co-host along with Paul Ogden. We have as guests Mike Cole and Jeff Cox. We're discussing best, worst, and most mediocre presidents in history. Big Hat Books is located at 6510 Cornell Avenue. World Book Night is going to be celebrated April 23rd. If you go to www.worldbooknight.org, there's a list of 30 books. You can pick one of those books, order it. 20 copies will be shipped to the bookstore where you go. If you come here, you can designate it at this bookstore. You pick them up, and then on April 16th, and then on April 23rd, have a party and give out all the books for free. They're encouraging people to read, which is a neat thing. The G.C. Lucas Gallery is up here on the second floor. There's space here to rent for special occasions. This is a great place. It's in Broad Ripple. It's locally owned.
It'd make a great ballet studio in this room.
We had some discussion off the air, Mark, about Herbert Hoover.
Yeah, and I'm going to
He
put
ended
him
up in none of our lists.
I'm going to put him in my as one of the 5 worst. And the reason is this. If you look at the causes, several causes of the Great Depression, one of them that really racked mid-North Indiana was the effect of World War I and the lack of money coming from it in the agricultural community. And what Hoover had done during World War I had given, the prices really went up, and they encouraged farmers to produce as many crops as they could, especially dry grains and stuff for shipping overseas because they didn't need storage. Farmers at that time were just going into mechanized farming, and so they were going from a horse-drawn plow to a tractor. So the farmers were selling their horses, they were buying tractors, they were taking out loans. The land upon which they were taking out the loans plummeted in value at the end of the war because it wasn't worth as much because of the crops, and it wasn't needed for grazing anymore. Horses were then becoming recreational. And he was the one who set those policies, but he didn't set them as president. And then when he came in as president, he was trying to catch up, and he couldn't do things. And he also ordered MacArthur to attack the veterans who had demonstrated in D.C. for their pensions in '31. And so that's why I put him there.
One thing, sort of off subject, Hoover, when he, I think it was 1920, I found it interesting from the Prohibition documentary that Ken Burns did. In 1920, FDR went to Hoover to try to get him to run for president, and FDR wanted to be his vice president at that time. So Hoover, I guess, had to pick a party.
Well, it's an interesting thing because I think Hoover gets punished for things that he did in his administration to try to stimulate the economy. And then FDR comes around and does many of the same kinds of things and gets a lot of credit for it.
And in terms of the criteria we were talking about in the first segment for great presidents, Hoover is one of the most brilliant people that served in the office of president. I'm sorry? Hoover was a very brilliant man, and so that's...
Wilson was a very intelligent man. I got him at the very bottom of my list.
Carter was a nuclear scientist.
Yes.
And he stunk.
Well, he was mediocre. Okay, we are now at the best. Paul, what order do you want to go with?
Well, actually, let's continue with our guests, because once we do our guests, they knock out a lot of our choices and it makes
not literally,
yeah,
fortunately.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's go with Mike.
Okay. Well, I put George Washington at the top of my list. You look at him and say, well, he didn't do much, but the key item right then and there was to guide a new country into its future, and to be able to set a tone for the country. And I think he did that really well.
I think it goes beyond that, not just setting the tone. If he had chosen to do so, he could have said, let's have a monarchy.
Exactly. Well, but that's what I'm getting at. And that's the thing. He was setting all the examples for the right way to do things and to give expression to
I don't think he could have said, I want a monarchy, and gotten the monarchy. I think what they had, and I agree he's one of the best. He's one of my 5 best. But after fighting for so long for what they called freedom, or what they called representative government, no taxation without representation. You couldn't go with a monarchy
Oh,
after
there was a
that.
very strong sentiment for monarchy in this country, though.
I'm not disagreeing that there was sentiment for monarchy in this country, but I'm saying he couldn't have asked for it and gotten it.
I think he was enough of a charismatic figure,
Oh,
though.
and beloved as the general of the army that defeated the British.
Yeah.
I mean, that sentiment was so strong. I could see either side of that one. I mean, I really think.
What about number 2, Mike?
Number 2, I put Jefferson in there. Some of my libertarian friends would take me to task on it because of it. And I think this is where it gets to, there is no perfect president. I mean, as good as Washington was, I don't find a flawless individual. I don't find a perfect character. The manner in which the land was acquired, and some libertarians would take issue with it. I don't take the same issue with that. I thought, those were the policies of the day, and they expanded our country tremendously. Some valuable land.
Quite literally.
Yeah, well, very literally. But I thought, Jefferson was one of the intelligent and thoughtful presidents, very deliberative. I liked his presidency.
I agree with TJ being on the list because of Louisiana Purchase. He was a thoughtful person, but he was off the wall at different times. If you want to find a quote to justify any political position that you want to take, you can find a quote from Thomas Jefferson. If you want to read something about why we need to maintain order and stability in government, you can get a quote from Jefferson. If you want a quote that says revolution every now and then is a good thing, you've got Jefferson. You've got him saying...
What about the internet protection?
quote
from Jeff.
I think that was Lincoln. That was Lincoln.
What about abortion? Does he say anything about abortion or anything?
But Jefferson, in terms of political philosophy, you could find it there. But with the Louisiana Purchase doing that was a major thing.
Sure. Number 3.
I put Lincoln there. There's no question that the issue of the day was the greatest strain the country had ever seen, and he took a course of action and saw it through. I think maybe the most brilliant thing that he did was to take out McClellan and put
So it took
Grant.
him a while.
Yeah, it took him a while, but when he did, it was decisive, and it changed the course of the war, and that.
Well, he took out McClellan, which he should have done because McClellan stunk as a general.
Well, McClellan didn't do anything. He would
Yes,
just,
that's
he would
right.
dawdle around and not really get to the business of prosecuting a war.
Yeah, he was like today's Republican office holders. But it took him a little while after getting rid of McClellan to find a general who would fight, because he first had to go to Ambrose Burnside, who was completely incompetent.
Except for developing sideburns.
It's good. I think that's a good thing.
Ask
And
my friends from the 70s.
and Joe Hooker, who I think was the best general of the Union in the Civil War.
Who gave us hookers?
Actually, he didn't.
No, that was no.
He
They followed his army, and so they.
Yes, they did. But he was a very, very good general, very underrated. It's just he shot his mouth off too much.
What about number 4?
Well, wait a minute. I want to stay on Lincoln for a minute.
Yeah, well, Lincoln's
Yeah,
always been a good.
I don't see Lincoln as being. I have a difficult time saying that he did anything.
How about the Emancipation Proclamation?
He didn't want to do it.
But he did it.
That-
No, it's not that he didn't want to do it. No, he wanted to do it at the right time.
He
He
said-
wanted to do it much earlier, and he held off because he understood politics, and he understood that the country wasn't right for it in his way of looking at it until such time as certain victories had occurred, and he could then say, okay, this is what we're going to do henceforth.
He said, if abolishing slavery will preserve the Union, then I am in favor of abolishing slavery. If doing nothing on the question of slavery will preserve the Union, then I will do nothing.
Here again, there's no perfect president.
Yes, but see,
I mean, he suspended habeas corpus.
I know.
This makes libertarians crazy. But it doesn't overshadow the fact that what he did preserve the Union and ultimately eliminate slavery.
yes, but he didn't do that as a goal. It just he kind of backed into that because
I disagree. If you look at the debates, the Lincoln Douglas debates, if you look at his campaign, the items that he put forward to the press, his statements, it's in there. And it's why, by the way, if you go back to Buchanan versus, why is Buchanan, who couldn't hold the Union together, revered or held in such poor esteem, but Lincoln, who smashed through the thing, and it fell apart. And what happened? The secession happened while Buchanan was in office, but it was because they knew what Lincoln stood for. And at that point, they said, "Oh, hey, forget it."
But it wasn't because of what Lincoln personally stood for. It was because he was the candidate of the Republican Party, and the South was afraid of. And one thing I want to get clear here too, and we're going to go into a fifth segment, so hell with it. One thing was the South was not for states' rights. I mean, there's this whole idea that the South was defending the sanctity of the states to do certain things. If you read the secession resolutions of the 4 complete secession resolutions, I think they are Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, they all say the same thing. The states' right they were talking about was slavery. They wanted to preserve slavery. The North did not go to war to abolish slavery. The North was going to war, it was to preserve the Union from an economic perspective.
However, during the War of 1812, there was talk about Northern secession back then. So this,
I know, and
it was an open question whether you could withdraw from
Well,
the Union.
and again, back to Buchanan. Buchanan's position was that secession was illegal, but he also believed that to prosecute a war to keep the Union together was illegal. So even as close to Lincoln as that, you had varying opinions.
You know, and when you look at what Lincoln did in the Proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation, I apologize, I spaced. That didn't free slaves in the North. I mean, there were
no slaves in the
There were
North.
slave-holding states in the states that did
The border states,
the border
Tennessee's,
states.
Kentucky.
Maryland, Missouri, and Kentucky. It only freed slaves in the South. It did not free slaves in those states. And so that meant that it wasn't really freeing
I have to
everybody.
look that up again.
I'm not sure
Yeah.
about that.
Oh, I am.
Yeah.
And so I don't really think that on the other side, Lincoln was a brilliant man in terms of politics. He was a brilliant man when it came to decision making and surrounding himself with people who were bitter rivals. That goes to something that Truman once said, which is to make a decision, you get the best information you can, you get the best people to advise you, you listen to them, you consider all the evidence, you make a decision, and you move on. And Lincoln had people who were in conflict with one another, and therefore, presumably, just like Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, had people who were bitterly opposed on policies, giving him advice on the missile crisis, and then he was able to evaluate from that, rather than people who were just going to kiss his ass. And that's so Lincoln. I'm conflicted about Lincoln and the irony with the Civil War, because I think that his greatness was, I mean, it was thrust upon him. He didn't plan on doing that. And so circumstances were such, and then what happened after that, especially his trying to heal the country, was something that was difficult in itself, and arguably John Wilkes Booth was part of a Northern conspiracy to bump off the president.
Number 4.
You know what? I only picked 3. To me, there was such a wide gulf between the top 3, and then you got to mediocrity. And I looked at them, and I looked at some of them, like we were talking about Schlesinger's surveys that have ranked the presidencies with contributions from college professors and historians, that type of thing.
And we'll be right back. I don't mean to interrupt you, but we're at the end of the segment. Constitution. So I believe we're going to be